In this video, we'll learn about the basics of penetration testing. And this is something that most organizations will outsource to some kind of partner. But we definitely need to understand the basics of penetration testing and the different types of penetration tests that we could potentially use. So a penetration test is a simulated attack on a computer system or a network or an application. And the big idea here is to find vulnerabilities. We want to find the vulnerabilities and then fix them. So penetration testers will use various techniques to basically mimic the actions of a real attacker. And there's multiple types of penetration tests that we're about to go through. So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. We have to use different types of penetration tests to test for different weaknesses. And so let's start with network penetration testing. And this is looking for vulnerabilities in our network. Things like our routers, our switches, our firewalls. We're going to probe our network for weaknesses. And we can do either external or internal testing. Now, external testing is coming from the outside world. It's coming from the internet. This targets public-facing components of your network. So if you have web servers, if you have VPNs that employees can use, the goal with an external test is to simulate attacks from the internet. So an example would be a penetration tester tries to break into your company's website over the internet. Now, there's also internal testing, and this simulates an attack from inside the organization. So this could be a malicious insider, some employee who is going to try to do something bad, or it could be somebody who just snuck into the building and now is connected to your Wi-Fi network, or maybe they've connected to your Wi-Fi network from the parking lot. And with an internal test, the penetration tester is actually going to connect to our internal network and try to access sensitive information. And some of the common techniques with network penetration testing would be things like port scanning to find open ports and running services, or exploiting firewalls that are configured improperly. And so if you have rules in your firewall that are too permissive or that are too wide open, those are the sort of things that will be exploited by a network penetration test. A web application penetration test is going to identify vulnerabilities in things like e-commerce platforms, online banking systems, or really any website, any resource that's available on the internet. And we can do a few different types of tests here. We can start with authentication testing. This is used to verify that the login mechanism is secure and cannot be bypassed. Now, there are multiple ways to potentially bypass authentication, things like SQL injection attacks or cross-site scripting. Something that we're going to see later on in this course is a brute force attack, where we just try thousands and thousands of different passwords to see if one works. So we want to identify if these things are possible and resolve them. The next type of test I want to talk about is a social engineering test. And with social engineering, we are going to test the human element of security. So we're going to try to manipulate people. We're going to try to see if people will actually adhere to our security policies. And there's a few different ways that we can do this. We can do this with phishing. We can send out emails that appear legitimate and try to trick users into providing their credentials or clicking on malicious links. We can use pretexting. So we can create a fabricated scenario to gain the trust of a target. So for example, a penetration tester could call an employee and say that they're from the HR department and ask for confidential information, and they can see if the employee will give that information up. So those are social engineering tests, and we've also got physical penetration tests as well. This is a test of our physical security. Can testers get into our offices, or even worse, get into our data centers? Are our dumpsters secured? That's kind of a funny one, but what if we aren't shredding everything that's confidential data? And we call these people dumpster divers. They'll go in, look through your dumpster, find something sensitive, and use that as a starting point to attack the organization. So we need to have this strong physical security. And one of the things that we need to prevent against is called tailgating. So let's say it's 8:30 in the morning and you're walking into work for the day, and somebody is behind you that you don't recognize, and they're carrying a couple of coffees and a bag, and it looks like they're going to struggle with the door. Do you hold that door open for that person? If so, you may be failing a penetration test. Another penetration test for physical facilities is impersonation. And in my personal experience, these are two of the tests that are failed most often: tailgating and impersonation, because people tend to want to be nice and friendly, and they don't want to be rude. And so with an impersonation attack, if somebody shows up to the office dressed like an exterminator, and they say, oh, I've got to put these little strips down throughout the office, I'm going to all of your locations, we're checking for any kind of insect infestation. The natural response of most people, especially people who are in reception and are used to being hospitable, is to let that person go in and do their thing. And now this person is walking around the building, and maybe they connect to our Wi-Fi. Maybe they plug a device into an Ethernet port and they leave it there. And maybe that's a Wi-Fi device, and now they have permanent access until somebody finds that device to our physical network. So carrying out these sorts of physical penetration tests is extremely important. And again, in my experience, these are some of the tests that are most frequently failed, that most frequently identify vulnerabilities. And the only way to really address them is to do a better job of training our employees.